Well done. Thank you. Hey, good morning. Happy Independence Day. Happy birthday, America. 244 years old. She still looks good. So it's good to be able to be here and to be able to be with you as well today. Let me just set the table a little bit for this dialogue today, because in the country right now and in our hearts right now, it is an odd season. I have to tell you, I don't know, almost every company that I've talked to over the last decade had set a vision 2020, that they were looking forward to 2020. It's clever, 2020 vision, all that stuff. Everyone did a 5-year plan, an 8-year plan, a 10-year plan. Everyone was looking forward to 2020. Well, welcome to it. So far, when I've talked to people that had a 2020 plan, it's all in the drawer. Because it's like everything we thought we would do in 2020, none of it actually has occurred. And it's been this odd year of every bit of chaos that's out there, but the chaos has caused us to get stirred. And I'm watching the nation and families and individuals get angrier and angrier and angrier as people get more and more anxious, as people get more and more upset. And the smallest things are lighting people up. Welcome to 2020. And as we sing these songs about the faithfulness of God and Him calming the storm, we remember again that it's not the calendar, it's not the events around our nation. It is a God who loves us and redeems us, and who has not forgotten, and who still speaks peace in storms. But what I've noticed as well is there are more and more people that I talk to that will talk about our nation and our families and our economy and all that's going on and all that's happening, and I hear this repetitive phrase again: it's broken, it's broken, it's broken, it's broken. But it's moved from it's broken to it's broken and it can't be fixed. How many of you have a car that is older than 10 years old? Let me see your hands. All right, there you go. Bless you. So I had, for the longest, a couple years ago, I finally sold it, and I'm going to regret it the rest of my life. But I had a 2003 Ford Expedition. It was only slightly smaller than my house, okay? If you've ever driven a Ford Expedition, you know exactly what I mean on this. It only took up my lane, but it took up all of my lane, if you know what I'm talking about, all right? I had no give on either side on it. I loved that truck. I had right at just under 200,000 miles on it when I drove it, when I sold it, and I regretted it that I sold it. And the next person's going to drive it another 200,000 and keep going from there. But I had one little problem with it. In that Ford Expedition, for years, the door ajar light was on, and the driver's side door. Always. The door ajar light was on. Now, I say always. There would be random days that it was not, but it was like that really good day. Otherwise, it's always on, the door ajar light. And it just, initially, you do the same things that I would do on that. You open the door and you slam it. You open the door and you slam it harder. You open the door and you get out and you push on it. Then you lock it, unlock, lock, unlock, slam, slam, slam. Go through then do every single door all the way around in case the sensor's wrong. It's not really the driver's side door. And so you go all the way around the vehicle. You know what I'm talking about? I wish I'd only done that once, because at random times when I had a little bit of extra time, I thought, okay, I'm going to try to fix it this time and figure out what's going on with it. But it just eventually, it's always broken, always broken. And I just gave up on it. Well, there's one time, I had this in D.C., by the way. So at one point, it was an evening that I also had the attenuator that was gone. I'm going to geek out on you here on some car mechanics. So those of you who like to turn a wrench are going to be with me. Everyone else, just go with me on this. So the attenuator was out at one point. I had to fix that because that's the air conditioner. And yes, okay, I'm an American. I need my air conditioner. So I go back. I pull the parts out, do everything, fix the attenuator, get that all done. And I think I've got a couple extra minutes. I'm literally parked in the AutoZone parking lot working on my truck because welcome to D.C., that's what you do. And so I'm out there working on the truck, and I figure out, you know what? I'm going to try to figure out while I'm here working on stuff, turning a wrench, I'm going to try one more time to try to figure out how to be able to solve this door jar problem. And so I do what every red-blooded American does at this moment. I pull my phone out and go to YouTube, and I hit door jar light on in 2003 Expedition, and the first video that comes up is a video of a guy taking the door panel off and all the wiring out. And I'm watching this video and I'm thinking, no, I'm not doing that in the parking lot, okay? That's not going to happen, okay? So I was like, what else we got out there? Somebody else got a different idea besides take the door panel off and do all the rewire. Next video I watched, the guy says door jar light was on in his expedition, so he took a little bit of WD-40 and sprayed it on the connector and it fixed it. Okay, even I can do that. So I walk back into AutoZone. I get this cute little can of WD-40. I spray it on the lock. I was like, yeah, this is not going to work. Slam the door jar light goes off. I was like, you are kidding me. For years, I have been fighting with my door jar light, and it was WD-40? Are you kidding me? That was what I needed to spray it on there, and that fixed the whole thing? Yeah, that fixed the whole thing. So 2 things to learn from life: WD-40 and slowing down and thinking broken things often have solutions, and sometimes it's more obvious than it looked. I run into people all the time that are angry, that are mad, that are distant, that their relationships are broken with people and broken with God, and they know it, and they won't come to God because they think it's going to be this long, protracted, complicated, just not going to do it. I'm just too far gone in life. I've done too much in life. It's too broken. It's not worth it. And they reject the most obvious thing they've heard over and over in their life. Why don't you come to Jesus? In the back of their mind, they're like, no, it couldn't be that simple. What if it is? And all the frustration and all the anger, what if it really is just go to Jesus? In all of your sin and of all the dumb stuff that you've done in your life that you think no one will care, what if he actually does? If you got your Bible with you, I want you to be able to pull it out. If you don't have it with you, I'm going to read it to you, or if you're here in the room, we're going to get a chance to be able to see it on the screen here. But it's a very familiar passage you're going to know. It comes from 2 Corinthians chapter 5. And I want to open this up in a little different way to be able to actually take a look at this. From 2 Corinthians chapter 5, beginning in verse 16, Paul's writing to the Corinthians, and he says, so from now on, it's like we're doing things a little different here. So from now on, we regard no one from a worldly point of view. Though we once regarded Christ in this way, we do so no longer. Here's the perspective. It's like we used to see things from a worldly point of view, like only as everyone else sees it. But now that we've come to know Christ, our eyes are open and go, wait, there's more to this world than what other people see. God has a bigger plan. God moves in the lives of people different than what I thought in the past. In fact, I love how Paul writes this. We don't look at individuals from a worldly point of view, though I used to even look at Christ that way. I used to look at Jesus the same way everybody else does. We're like, yeah, just a religious teacher, just a guy, just a dude, just a historical figure. I used to look at this the same way other people do. No, I don't anymore, he says. I don't do that anymore because I've learned who he really is. So from now on, we regard no one from a worldly point of view. Though once we regarded Christ in this way, we do so no longer. Therefore, if anyone is in Christ, the new creation has come. The old is gone. The new is here. All this is from God, who reconciled us to himself through Christ and gave us the ministry of reconciliation. That God was reconciling the world to himself in Christ, not counting people's sins against them. And he has committed to us the message of reconciliation. If you didn't pick this up, we have the ministry, the task of reconciliation, and the message of reconciliation. We are therefore Christ's ambassadors, as though God were making his appeal through us. We implore you on Christ's behalf, be reconciled to God. God made him who had no sin, that is Jesus, to be sin for us, that in him we might become the righteousness of God. In this passage, I see a big truth and I see a big task. So can I run this past you? A big truth and a big task. The big truth, you're going to see this. Everyone who comes to Christ is a new creation. Everyone who comes to Christ is a new creation. That's why it's so amazing to be able to watch a baptism. And when we see a baptism, we think, I remember who that person used to be, and I would have never thought I would have seen them come to Christ. And at the moment you catch yourself saying, gosh, even they came to Christ, you catch yourself saying, that means I used to see them from a worldly point of view. I used to think God's grace is not big enough to cover even them. I don't think that way anymore because I've seen God extend his grace to every person. When you catch yourself at some moment saying, oh, that person's just lost as a goose in a snowstorm, there's just no chance, like just craziness. When you catch yourself saying, I can't stand that person, I bet even God doesn't like that person, okay? When you catch yourself at that moment, what you're really saying is, I see them from a worldly point of view. Maybe even catch yourself saying that about yourself. Paul's writing to them and saying, every person who comes to Jesus is like a new creation, brand new, start all over again, forgiven of the old, and has the opportunity to be able to walk in the new, a new creation. There's this ongoing conversation that's just kind of funny to me in culture and in church life, and maybe you've caught yourself at some moment on this, so I'm gonna just bring this up and let you just think about this in your own head, okay? About a year ago, a hip-hop artist, rap artist named Kanye West announced that he was publicly professing his faith in Jesus Christ. And I had all kinds of folks that pulled me aside in D.C. and in Oklahoma both that pulled me aside and said, okay, do you think this is a publicity stunt? Do you think this is real? Do you think this is legit? I was like, let me begin with first. I don't know any person's heart. But is your question, could even Kanye come to Christ? Or is your question, is this a publicity stunt? Because if your question is, can the Kardashians come to Jesus? My answer to you is yes. Absolutely. If your question is, this is a publicity stunt, I don't know. Keeps putting songs out about his faith and keeps doing testimonies about his faith. I have no idea. But I do know God's grace extends to every single person. And that there is no person, there is no family, there is no individual that is too complicated for God that God would look at and go, wow, that one's a tough one. I don't know. Let me read a different passage. You can stay there in 2 Corinthians if you want to, but take a flip. If you want to just leave your sacred string there in 2 Corinthians and flip to Ephesians with me, you can do that. But Ephesians chapter 4, verse 22, 23, and 24, I want to just read this to you. It says, Paul again, same writer, but he's writing to a different church in a different place. He says, you were taught, in Ephesians chapter 4, he says, you were taught with regard to your former way of life to put off your old self, to take those things off, which is being corrupted by its deceitful desires, to be made new in the attitude of your minds, and to put on the new self, created to be like God in true righteousness and holiness. And then Paul gets super personal. In Ephesians chapter 4, if you want to just dig through this passage, if you get bored with me talking, you can go through and read Paul's stuff. But in Ephesians chapter 4, he goes from take off the old stuff. You know what you used to be like. Take that off like an old shirt and go take that off, put on the new. And then he says crazy stuff to them. He says, if you used to lie, don't lie anymore. Lying's like the old self. If you used to steal, don't steal anymore. That's like the old self. Put on the new. And then he keeps digging down even personal. If you have a life of anger, take that off because that's the old self. In your anger, don't sin, he says. Put on the new self. And then he keeps drilling down even further. He says, don't let any unwholesome talk come out of your mouth, but only what's beneficial for those who listen. Because unwholesome talk, attacking people, that's the old self. Put on the new self. And then he just keeps drilling down on that. Anger, rage, malice. And he drills down more and more, and he goes, you recognize those things? That's the old self. Put on the new. Because you're a new creation. We used to be separated from God. We used to live in this old way. But when Jesus came into our life, he not only made us a new creation, but he gave us the opportunity to put on the new. Now, the hard part is when you come to Christ and you're a new creation, you still have the old jersey in the closet. And there's some days that you decide, and I decide, you know what, that old jersey feels good. I'm going to wear the old life today. And by the end of the day, madder, angrier, more frustrated, debris field behind you. And sometimes you get up the next day and go, that day felt good, I'm going to wear the old jersey again. And it just keeps spiraling until at some point you have to decide, am I going to put on the new or not? We are a people loved by God. We are a people that see the work of God in our lives and that understand that every person could come to Christ. Every person has the opportunity to be forgiven, to experience what those of you that have understood and come to know Christ, what you have experienced, the new creation, to have the opportunity to be able to put on the new and to take off the old and to be able to see the impact that that really makes in your life. We see that impact in families. We see that impact in nations. We see that impact in racial reconciliation. We see that impact in the way that we handle our own personal broken relationships with God. The Reconciler. It's the big truth. You can begin again. And for those of you that can and chose to begin again with God, you can put on the new jersey. Or you can keep wearing the old one and feel the frustration and anger and bitterness and separation. But the calling is, if you've been made new, put on the new. It's the big truth. The big task is interesting to me on this, though. The big task is the challenge to be a reconciler. Paul didn't just leave this out here as a theological concept. Sounds very deep and intriguing, but he says, you know what? Not only can you be reconciled to God, you should be a reconciler. Those of you that have come to Christ know that you have been reconciled, and you have this message of reconciliation now. You can pass that on to other people so that they can also be reconciled to God. Now, to be reconciled is a big fancy word on it. Paul drops it 5 times in this passage, so he's pretty serious about it. Reconciled is typically just a broken thing made new again. We see it with a broken bone being reset, being reconciled. Not always a fun process of fixing a broken bone. How many of you have had a broken bone before? Let me see your hands. Okay, hopefully that's not the hand that was broken, I guess, since that would hurt a little bit, bringing it up or whatever it may be. But repairing what was broken in something that was getting it reconciled again is not a real fun process. I've noticed the same thing in reconciliation among people and among families. Have you noticed that as well? Reconciliation with families is a little bit of work. One of the byproducts of COVID-19 has been families slammed into the same house for long periods of time, staring at each other. There's only so many games of Scrabble you can play before somebody grabs the pieces and starts just throwing them at everybody. Like, okay, I'm tired of this. And you suddenly realize, okay, there's a little bit of extra carrying over here. Reconciliation is not just passing by and being passive and saying, okay, we're fixed, we're getting on with this. Let me just say it this way. There's a difference between being friendly with somebody and friends with somebody, right? I find in a lot of families that are broken, they had a big falling out at some point, and so every Thanksgiving and every Christmas after that, they're friendly to each other. And the way you evaluate the holiday is, no one fought this time. That's not reconciled. If the goal is, no one screamed at each other this year, what a good Christmas this was, that's brokenness. Something's unreconciled there. And it only gets better when the dialogue actually begins and you start talking through how to be able to reconcile. Paul drops this out to the church in Corinth, and he says, the challenge is you have been reconciled to God. You used to be distant from God. You used to say, God's over there, I'm over here, he's got his stuff, I've got my stuff, we just don't bother each other. That's what you used to be like. And then you recognized, you know what, I'm separated from God, not because God's mad at me. I'm separated at God because I'm mad at him. I'm the one that sinned. I'm the one that did the stupid thing. That was me. I need to be forgiven by God. And you did the hard thing. You actually said, God, would you forgive me? And he said, not only would I forgive you, I love you. And Jesus, who had no sin, became sin for you so that you could be reconciled to God. He says, not only do I love you, I already made a way for you to be reconciled if you would come. Now, the cool thing is, that's the big truth, but it's also the big task. We have the opportunity to be able to say that to others, because there's lots of people that we are in our family with, that you work with, that you live around, that they live a life separate from God, and they think there's no way God would ever care about me, and you know different. You know God does. So you have the opportunity to be able to have that message to them and to be able to say, no, you can be reconciled to God. In fact, Paul drove this down when he said this interesting statement here. He said, we are therefore Christ's ambassadors, as though God were making his appeal through us. We implore you on Christ's behalf, be reconciled to God. So he took it from the task of reconciliation and the message of reconciliation to saying, basically, let me give you an example. You're like an ambassador. Now, how many of you have ever met an ambassador before? Is there anyone here that's ever met? Okay, we got 1, 2, that's ever met an ambassador. Most people have never even met an ambassador. Let me just tell you real quick. We have ambassadors all over the world from the United States. There's 2 types of ambassadors that are out there. One type of ambassador got a graduate degree, usually in international relations. They work their way through the process in cultural studies. They've done lots of years of language study. They've done multiple different tours in different embassies all over the world where they've learned different cultures. They've interacted through a process. They've spent decades and decades studying and preparing to be able to be an ambassador, and then they get appointed as an ambassador. Okay, that's one type of ambassador. A second type of ambassador is a wealthy donor to a presidential campaign. True story. When you meet the ambassador, you'll know which one they are, okay? It's been that way for decades and decades and decades. So small, wealthy little countries that are out there, they get the wealthy political donors, and complicated countries get the other folks, okay? But the job is the same for them. The job is to be able to live American values in another country and to represent who we are as a country. That's their job. It's a cool job. And so they'll go to whatever country that they're assigned to, and they're not assigned to become like that country. They're assigned to stay an American, keep our values, but to represent who we are and who we are not to that country. It's been that way for a very long time. One of my favorite stories about an ambassador is actually a guy named Thomas Jefferson. You might have heard of him. So he wrote some document pertinent to this weekend. So Thomas Jefferson, before we actually had a constitution done, so after the Declaration of Independence, after the Revolutionary War was finished, we were under the Articles of Confederation. Thomas Jefferson was our ambassador to France. So as our ambassador to France, he's there representing the United States. Okay, you can imagine how complicated this would be to be the ambassador to France when we're barely even a country at that point. Well, there's a guy that was a naturalist, that was a French naturalist. I've got to be able to say his name correctly so I don't mess this up, because I don't read a lot of French naturalist stuff on it. His name is Georges de Buffon. Okay, I'm sorry I didn't name him. That's just his name. Georges de Buffon. He was writing all about how as culture thrives, so do the animals around you. This was his theory in the 1700s. As culture thrives, the animals thrive around you. And his statement was, that's why animals are larger in Europe than they are in the new America, because our culture is better here. And so the animals are thriving and stronger, the same as our culture. And animals are smaller in America because they have such a small culture. Now, we look at that and think, you got to be kidding me. But in Europe, that was widely accepted at the time. Well, it completely ticked off Thomas Jefferson. Thomas Jefferson's reading this, and he's furious about it. And so he contacts a friend of his by letter. Obviously, he didn't text him. Would have been cooler if he in the story. But he contacts a letter that is the governor of New Hampshire and says, send me a moose. True story. So the governor of New Hampshire takes some of their National Guard. They send out, go hunting, get a moose. Great story, because they actually had to cross the state line into Vermont to get it. Makes it even better story. So they kill a moose, they pack it, and then they ship it. It took 3 months to be able to get to him. Can you imagine what that moose smelled like when they opened that box, okay? The goal was, and what Thomas Jefferson did, was to take this giant moose carcass and delivered it to Georges de Buffon and dropped it off at his house and said, here is an animal from North America. It became the big story in France at the time. Basically, Thomas Jefferson was saying, don't attack my country. Don't put false information out about who we are. Here's who we really are. And as a good ambassador, he got right information to them. The reason I tell you that story is you are the ambassador for Christ. There are people out there that believe all kinds of crazy things about Jesus. Crazy stuff. That you start to talk to them about Jesus and they say stuff back to you, and you can either look at them with your mouth open and go, that's the craziest thing I've ever heard. Where did you get that? What TV show did that come from? Or you can be an ambassador and say, no, I know Jesus. Let me tell you what it's really like to walk with him. Let me tell you what it's really like to be forgiven by him. Let me tell you what it's really like to be deeply loved by the God who made you. You're an ambassador. It is the big task. You can just watch the false information about Jesus out there, or you can go engage and correct it. Which one are you going to do? We've been reconciled. We have the ministry and the message of reconciliation. Our life has been radically changed because of a God who loves us. And we have the choice every day because of that to put on the new or to grab the old stinky jersey from the old and put it on. If you're a new creation, why don't you put on the new today? If you're not a new creation, I don't care how messed up your life is. I don't care what you've done in the past. I don't care how hopeless you feel like you are, that you think, yeah, you don't know how messed up my life really is. God would never accept me. Guess what? He will. You see, there's a God who stands outside of time, and he sees the beginning and the end of your life. He knows what could happen in your life in the days ahead that you don't know. And if you're willing to take the biggest risk of your life to find out if the simplest solution actually works, why don't you try it? Why don't you ask him to forgive your sin and watch him make a new creation of your life? Can I let you just pray and think about it for a moment? Why don't you bow your heads? If you're watching online or if you're here, I'd ask you still to pause either way. I'd like you to be able to process this for just a moment. My challenge is very simple. Has God ever come into your life and forgiven your sin? Have you ever asked the God of the universe to forgive you? You know you need his forgiveness. You know that. That's why you're here. That's why you're watching online. You know you need him. Are you willing this morning to say, God, my life is so broken, and I've rejected you so many times. Would you accept me? And can I accept your life and your forgiveness? Jesus, forgive me. Come into my life and take control. Now, I know that may sound like WD-40, that you think that's just too simple. But I'm telling you, the beginning point with God, he did not make challenging. Put on the new uniform. Take off the old. Receive him into your life. Let him change you from the inside. And watch how your heart changes. If you're a person that's a follower of Christ, but you have never really followed him as an ambassador, you're letting other people do that ambassador work. Would you hear Paul's challenge to you? You have the ministry and message of reconciliation. You do. This is not somebody else's job. You are the ambassador. That's why you live in that neighborhood, work at that job, in that family, because you are the ambassador for Christ in that spot. Are you doing your task? That's a simple yes or no. If not, why not? What's holding you back from being the ambassador? Wearing the wrong jersey all the time? Letting anger, malice come out of you? And you're afraid to be able to talk about Jesus with what's coming out of your mouth and out of your life at other times. If you're going to be an ambassador, why don't you make the decision now to put on the new self, to take off the old, and pick up the task. Father, none of us really know what the future holds. We all thought we knew what was going to happen this year. We have no idea. But we know you. And we trust you. You're at work in our hearts. You're at work in our families. You're at work in our nation. God, help us to not forget and to not start seeing people from a worldly point of view again. But help us to be able to see you. God, call us to be your ambassadors. Equip us for that task and help us to not be afraid to speak what is true and right. Father, I pray for people that are watching or people that are here in this room that don't know you. God, would you whisper into their soul, I love you, and I will forgive you. Would you help them be reconciled to you? God, let it be. In the name of Jesus, I ask. Amen. Church family, let me make this super simple for you because I really think my Father made it that simple and straightforward. If you've never been reconciled to God, that means you have a broken relationship with God. You should make that right. You should take the step to say, I won't have a broken relationship with the one who made me. Why would I do that? Lots of different ways to be able to respond to that. I know lots of people have questions about it. If you have questions, you can text in and just say, hey, I want to know what it means to know Christ. I'd be glad to be able to have somebody from this church just be able to text back and forth with you and just say, I'll answer your questions. I'll help you walk through this process. It may be that you want to be able to have somebody call you or email you, or you want to just be able to visit with somebody face-to-face. Great. This church would be glad to do that. You've got a little card in the back of the chair there in front of you. You can pull that card out. Just put your name on it, email, cell phone number, whatever information you want to give us. And then when you're leaving out, there's some baskets by the door. Just drop it in those baskets as you walk by and just say, okay, somebody will follow up with me. And they will. Or there's also going to be just some pastors hanging out here at the front just to be able to talk if you want to be able to talk. Or quite frankly, if you want to be able to just break away and pray. The coolest thing is, the person that invited you today probably invited you today because they wanted you to know that you could be reconciled with God. That's probably why they invited you to watch online or to be able to come attend today. So if you want to do something really fun, turn to the person that invited you and say, what do I do now? And I bet they'll answer your question. Because they wanted you to be able to hear the simple truth. Everyone can be reconciled with God. Everyone. And for you, everyone who has been reconciled should be an ambassador. Everyone. Time to put on the jersey. Time to be able to live what we believe. You ready? Let's do it. Let's stand together. You respond to God as you choose to, but you respond to God today.